مساء الخير للجميع.
Good evening, everyone. First, I would like to welcome the dear speakers in this webinar that we are going to hold, in which we are going to speak about the issue of detention in Syria. This issue, it is not a new one, and recently we have heard a lot of talks about it, and some people maybe question that all the panels, all the uh, webinars are speaking about this issue. But of course, because this is an ongoing problem, it is the great pain in Syria for all Syrians, and there is always something new. And I repeat that in every webinar. As we are speaking right now, there are more and more cases of detention and people who are dying or are being killed under torture. That's why it is very important to always be linked to this issue, whether as civils, as human rights activists, or as survivors and families of detainees. Today, we are going to focus mainly in our discussion about the Charter of Truth and Justice that was issued by a number of associations of survivors. It was launched 8 months ago. The charter,
معظم السادة المتابعين اليوم سمعوا عنه، ربما
maybe some of the audiences heard about it, some others didn't hear. The Charter of Truth and Justice is a kind of roadmap where the associations of the survivors and the families of detainees to advance and advocate for the issue of the detainees. So for all international audience or international parties, when they ask us, what are you doing for that? We tell them we are the families of the victims and we are the survivors. We are working on this issue in which we provide our demands and our vision for this issue. The 5 associations that participated in this charter are the families of Caesar Association, the former detainees of Sednaya Association, Massar Association, which works for the issue of the detainees and abducted by ISIS, and Families for Freedom Association. Today, I would like to welcome my speakers who will be our panelists today. Miss Fadwa Mahmoud, my colleague and my partner in the struggle for the families for freedom, Miss Al
عائلات
Hallaq,
قيصر.
Maryam Al Hallaq.
السيد
She is a
خليل
founder of the Caesar's family, and Mr. Khalil Al Saleh, the head of Massar Association, Mr. Ahmad Helmi, who is the head of Ta'afi initiative, and Mr. Diab Serriya, who is the head of Sednaya prison, former detainees. I will start with you, Diab, about your work in the association. And as we spoke before with you, you are working on a report that catches the blackmailing, or let's call it the black market, for which families of the detainees are being dragged to learn any piece of information about their loved ones in the detainees. But you, in the Association of the Sednaya Detainees and Missing Persons, you are working on this report. So would you please tell us more about this study? Thank you very much, Ms. Amina. Thank you, and thanks for all who organized this meeting. I don't know where to start and where to finish when we speak about the issue of detention and forced disappearance. As you said, we focus more on Sednaya prison, and we try to cover other detention centers. I believe the financial blackmailing of or extortion of people is one part or one piece of the details of so many other details that are related to the issue of detention. We have been working since 2018 on documenting these issues, providing advice to the families, and helping them in the search for their families. You called it the black market. We call it the trade of detention centers or the detention centers business, because in addition to the several suffering that we have or detainees have, there are networks that are organized, including security officers in the army, Shabiha thugs, members, including some judges, some lawyers, and others who are part of these networks. They are engaged in blackmailing families for getting large amounts of money to give the simplest rights of people, which is the whereabouts of their loved ones who are detained. But as we all know, in Syria and under the Syrian regime, we don't have any rights for people. So the amount that we were able to report that are received by the Syrian regime is about 900 million US dollars since 2011. And we are talking about from the families of the detainees. Here we are talking about the confiscated property for people who were detained and released, or here we're talking about the survivors. So we are also working on another report that looks at the impact of these confiscations and the amount of the property and money that were confiscated by the regime. Uh, and we were talking about confiscation. These are judicial orders. We're not talking here about someone who was detained and his car was taken by the security branch. Here we are talking about judicial ruling issued by the court of terrorism or the military court to confiscate their movable and immovable property. For these parts, we're talking about 32 worth 32 million US dollars worth of a property, and this will be in a report that will be issued soon. I'm going to tackle another point which is related to the detainees and the forcibly disappearing or the forced disappearances in Syria. It's not only a matter of that people were taken and put in prisons and they gone missing. Nobody knows about that. Although this is the main crime that is still going on until today after 10 years, which is the forced disappearance crime, and people are still suffering from that problem. The issue is related more in the structure of the Syrian regime, which has been in place for 30 or 40 years, that if you oppose any of the policy of the regime, your destiny will be in a prison and to get lost or to go missing. This is the regime's policy of making people disappear. So that's right. When we speak about detention, the main part is to disclose the fate of the detainees, and it is followed with the reforming the structure of this regime and to reform this detention system that started with the with Hafez al-Assad and continued under Bashar al-Assad. So when we speak about the future of Syria in any kind of negotiations or any kind of political transition in Syria. Why we keep talking about the issue of detainees? Because this is something that affects the future of Syria. When we are talking about the detention system, if people are only released and the people destiny was disclosed, but we still have, for example, Sednaya prison, military court, and security branches that are capturing people, then we as if we have done nothing, because these detention can be repeated later. So what we say is that we want our loved ones, we want our sons who were missing, and it's not only that. We want, or this is something that is goes deeper than that, and any tendency to dismantle this repressive regime. Of course it has to deal with the issue of detention and the detention system in Syria. As you mentioned, Ms. Amina, the Truth and Justice Charter, which includes our vision for immediate solutions, which are the short-term justice and the long-term justice. But now, right now, when in the charter we're talking about the immediate needs, and we're saying that the Syrian regime should provide name lists of the detainees. Uh, there should be visits for the detention places, Sednaya and other security forces safely and freely. Our work and the work of other humanitarian organizations, everybody knows that no one is capable to ask for their detained sons, because they don't want, for example, to uh, lose themselves, or to be detained themselves, or to lose another son, for example. This is something that we mentioned. And there are other issues that were mentioned in the charter, and I'm not going to get into the details of these issues. My colleagues will mention that. Thank you, after all, for inviting me and for this organization. Thank you very much. That's all from my
يعطيك
side.
العافية. يعطيك العافية دياب.
Thank you very much, Diab.
ننتقل هلا
I will move now
لسيدة
to
فدوى.
Ms. Fadwa.
سيدة فدوى ذكرت أنا بالتقديم
Ms. Fadwa, I mentioned in the introduction about the charter. Diab also talked about the charter.
تعطينا هيك توضيح أكثر
If you
عشان
may give us more clarification,
بعض الحضور يلي هن ما
so
عندهم
the
معلومة عشان تكون
audience
عندهم رؤية
who
جيدة عن
don't know
بحيث
about
حديثنا يكون واضح لهم.
the
تفضلي
charter,
سيدي.
so they can have a better idea about the charter. Thank you very much, Amna, for the invitation. I'm sorry. Unlike me, I am a little bit confused, but because as I'm speaking to the Syrians. And what can I say to the Syrians? We have the same hopes and the same pains. So whatever I say, maybe they know everything I'm going to say, because they are the owners of this cause and this pain that not only suffered by me or by Amina, most of the Syrian people is going through the same suffering. That's why I'm a little bit um, not like myself. I am Fadwa Mahmoud. I am member of the families for freedom. I will speak a little bit about the movement, and then I'm going to answer the question. Since the days of Hafiz al-Assad, what I want to say that everybody knows, all the Syrian people know that detention didn't start in 2011. It is a heritage that has started with Hafiz al-Assad since this regime came to existence. As Diab mentioned, that anybody who goes against the vision of this system or this regime, they go missing or get detained. I was detained when Hafiz al-Assad was in power, and I left my sons for 2 years. Maher, my son Maher, who is in detention now, he was 7 years old at the time. I always say that I'm afraid that not only Maher is detained, that even my grandchildren will get detained. That's why, for that reason, and in order to stop this regime, this repressive regime, we are doing this. we established the Families for Freedom. We started five ladies, five women who don't know each other, but we, the five, share the same pain, the same anguish. We have either a husband or a father or a son or a husband and sons that are detained. So this objective brought us together, which is to talk about the detainees, not only for our own kids, but maybe we were lucky that we managed to leave Syria and we managed to communicate our voices to the international community. But we are not representing ourselves alone. We are representing those whose voices are unheard. And we know that those in Syria, they can't even ask about their children. Why? Because repression is still effective. We all know that detention and forced disappearances are still taking place. At this very moment, people are getting detained, and yet people are getting are being forcibly disappearing, and nobody knows where they are. So we managed to communicate our voice to the international community. Although, with all due respect, I don't believe in the international community, and please forgive me if I'm saying that. Then this movement started to expand until we started to have so many families, and those families started to say, well, there is someone who is speaking on our behalf. So the movement increased, and now Miss Amina was one of the ladies who went to the Security Council, and for the first time, the issue of detainees was presented in the Security Council, and this was an achievement because I'm sorry to say, all those people who work on the issue of detainees, if they are not Syrians, they don't care that much because we are talking about our beloved ones, our sons who disappeared. Then we made the Freedom Bus. This Freedom Bus traveled in four international capitals, and we put on the bus the pictures and the photos of our sons and our detained loved ones, and we told the people that those people are in detention, although they are the roses who should build Syria and change this dictatorship that we have in Syria. Bashar al-Assad, of course, what he did to those roses, to those young people, they put them in prison. For the bus of a freedom or the freedom bus, we said that we want to continue our struggle, and instead of the pictures or their pictures that we put on this bus, we want to put them themselves on the bus and release them from the prisons and travel with them in these capitals, and they can say that due to the struggle of our parents, we managed to be released. So what we want to do is to raise our voices more and more. So we gathered with five associations that are linked with the matter of detainees. Um, for example, my partner in suffering, Maryam, her son is a martyr. He was killed in the war. Mr. Khalil suffered from ISIS, and Ahmad was in the detention. So we all are part of this suffering. So we came together and we issued what we call the Charter of Truth and Justice. Some people might say, what does it mean? Of this charter. I can say, or I may say, it will not achieve anything in the foreseeable future. But this charter, by doing this and doing so many other activities, the cause will still will stay alive, and it will not be forgotten. And we continue saying that if this system is changed or this regime is changed, and it will change soon, the new government, what will do to know the places of those disappeared persons? But when we have documented events, we can continue demanding our rights and demanding the revealing of their whereabouts. Whenever we meet with any members of the international community or those who work in human rights, they say, "What can we do for you to help you?" And they cry with us a little bit, showing some sympathy. I don't want this sympathy anymore. I don't want to see that sympathy. We want to see something on the ground. So we created this charter for truth and justice. It is a roadmap. If they don't know how to do this work, we know how. And we are going to tell you, if you have the will to work, to follow this roadmap, to do something for this cause. So the Charter for Truth and Justice covers a lot of issues, and any Syrian who have someone who is missing or detained, and anybody who wants Syria to live uh, a better future. So this is covered in the charter, and we have short-term demands and long-term demands. The first demand is to release our sons. We want to see them. We want to know the fate of our sons. My husband and my son, in this month, they will. It would be 9 years in a prison. I don't know anything about their whereabouts or anything about them. And not only me, I'm not only speaking about myself as Fadwa, I'm speaking for all the families in Syria. It is our right to know anything, any piece of information about them. If they are still alive, tell us. If they don't, if they are not alive, tell us. Maryam always say, I want to have a grave for my son to cry on. So this is our right. The human issue or the human cause is the most important one in the world. And when the five groups came together, we started to be stronger. And as I told you, I always believe in the group work because the results will be better. As I told you, the larger our group become, and the more our voice is unified, the better the impact will be. The Charter for Truth and Justice, we demanded the release of detainees, revealing or disclosing their fate, and we demanded our basic right, which is to visitation to our detained ones. If we are unable to do that, at least there are human rights organizations or other legal organizations that should be able to do these visits. For example, during COVID-19, do we have any idea what happened in these prisons? We demanded international organizations to ask to know what is happening in these detention places during COVID-19. We are not in the prisons, and we are taking precautions, and nevertheless we are catching COVID-19. What is the case of those people who are in detention without any capacity to do anything? So the Charter for Truth and Justice covers everything. And if you want, we can display it on a page, because it requires some maybe a session, a separate session to explain it. What you have 1 minute. So what I want to say in a brief is that when we work together and we gather our efforts, our voice will be stronger. And now, as I am with you, maybe in the beginning I was confused and shaking, but when I feel that you are with me, I become stronger and better. Sometimes I get frustrated, I cry, I get exhausted, just like all other people. However, I always tell myself that we will continue to work and we will continue doing that, because our sons need someone to say that those people deserve to live. those are the ones who deserve to live, not those regimes that are killing people who will remain living and our sons die in a prisons. What I'm going to conclude with is that I'm going to continue this effort, and every opportunity I have to speak with you and to speak together, I'm going to seize such opportunities, and we will get stronger when we work together. Thank you very much. I didn't interrupt you, although you passed the time allocated for you, but because it is painful, especially when it comes from a wife and a mother. And I know that because we have been working together for 5 years in this road. May God grants us with strength and bravery. Although you spoke about our anguish and agony, this makes us stronger. You, as a mother, your words make people stronger. Now I will move to Ahmad. Ahmad is going to introduce himself. After Diab spoke about the situation or the conditions in Sednaya prison, and Ms. Fadwa talked about the suffering of uh, the families. It is very good to hear from you, Ahmad. Why we are doing that work? Do we have any hope? Will there be any fruit of our efforts? And if there is no effort, should we stop working? Go ahead. Thank you, Amne. Thank you, Fadwa and Diab, for your words. It's always difficult to speak after Fadwa, and we always try to not to speak after Fadwa, because anything that we're going to say, it won't be as impactful as it should be if we speak before her. I will start from where Fadwa finished about the frustration. Recently, in the Syrian community and with the families of the detained and the missing persons and the forcibly disappeared person, we are sharing this frustration. The international community, which says that it believes in justice, human rights, accountability, and the necessity to do change in the world, maybe they believe in that, but they're not doing any action to make that a change. Not to mention that they don't believe in the rights for or universal rights for all people. That's why we think that so many of the we see now many countries that are trying to normalize relations with the people, and we see some armed factions that perpetrated crimes against people. They were dismantled and escaped, and there is no one left of them to hold them accountable. And we see maybe now an attempt to bring back the Syrian regime to the Arab League, and it came back a while ago. It was brought back to the Interpol. This makes people feel frustrated. But do we feel that frustration? Yes, maybe. But frustration is not an option for us. Now, people get frustrated when, for example, they are looking for a project to make money out and they fail to do so, they might feel frustrated. For people who seek a university program and couldn't do that, might be frustrated. But for us, we don't have the luxury to get frustrated. We can't now stop working and we say, we don't want our loved ones. So we can't lose hope in getting them back. We can't say that people who are in detention and those who were killed under torture, well, we lost them. Let's move forward. We can't. This is not an option for us. Moving forward in such a case is falling into a trap. So this is not an option. However, is clinging to hope is a stupid clinging or a realistic one? This brings me to say about what we have learned and read about other conflicts in the world where crimes were perpetrated, like the ones that were perpetrated in Syria, the tensions, the torture, and the huge numbers that were maybe not as big as the numbers that we have seen in Syria, because the the volume of forced disappearances in Syria haven't been seen in the world since World War II. But there were conflicts where people managed to bring back the rights of their people. But how? That was through raising their voices. We have a proverb that says the baby cannot get food from his mother unless he cries or she cries. So that's what we are going to do. We are going to make a lot of noise and to continue persisting on people or decision makers, policy makers on daily basis to restore our rights. And these rights will be restored as long as we are demanding these rights. And we are demanding that. Of course, we don't need to reiterate how legitimate our cause is, and this is the right of people to get information about their detained ones. These are God-given rights, and they are also in the international laws are enshrined rights, but they are not applied in our country. And what we have seen from different other conflicts in the world, that the wives, sisters, mothers, and survivors from detention are the leaders of these demands. They are in the lead because they don't get bored. Once I was with a Diab in a meeting, and we said that I can't say I am bored and I don't want to hold the one who tortured me accountable. Maryam can say, well, I will try to live in Hawaii by the side of the sea, and I'm not going to demand the rights of myself and my son anymore. We don't have the luxury. And this is a continuation of the struggle of the victims. We are stubborn people. We're not going to seize this struggle in the next 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. As long as we are breathing, we are going to continue this struggle. Now, is that going to bear fruit? Yes. 5 years ago, the issue of detainees in Syria and the forcibly disappeared people was marginalized in Syria. It was forgotten by the policymakers, decision makers in the international community. No one was speaking about that topic. It was a marginal topic. But today, after 10 years of struggle and all the efforts of people who worked on that issue, from a mother who posted on Facebook that she misses her detained son, or people who worked on prosecutions or the Caesar Act, and we, the associations that we have been working together, we reinvigorated the issue of detention and forcibly disappeared people to the top of the agenda on the international discussions. Today, when the countries are discussing any issues in Syria, they are tackling the issue of the detainees and the forcibly disappeared persons. So hope is there. The more we do, the more we work, the bigger the hope is. When we started with the charter, as Fadwa mentioned, the positive thing is that we took the lead and we started to provide answers. We took further steps than the slogans like free the detainees. Who is going to do that? Because as we always say, or as Fadwa said, that it is a complicated issue, and how can we help you? So we try to get into the details. When we said or we called it a charter for truth and justice, short-term and long-term objectives, now we have awareness that there are several issues that are linked to the international political will and the presence of the regime and the perpetrators in in office, and there are uh, files that are being prepared for the moment when this when the perpetrators are expire, when they expire. When this moment comes, these issues will be addressed. But we are aware that these issues need to be tackled from this day. We don't have to wait until the end of the conflict, until those criminals go away. Our responsibility and our priority is to disclose the fate of the missing persons and the forcibly disappeared persons. This is something that we can work as of today, regardless of the fruits of the negotiations. So we provided a solution for the international community. We said that we want to have an independent international mechanism that works on exposing or disclosing the fate of the detained and forcibly disappeared persons. And this mechanism can start working from today. This is something that tells us that we have hope. As long as we are able to make that noise, our voices will be heard. Thank you very
شكرا
much.
أحمد، يعطيك العافية. الحقيقة أنت
Thank
فتحت
you,
موضوع
Ahmed.
كمان مهم،
You mentioned a very
واللي
important
هي
point,
إنه سابقا
which
يمكن
is
كان
that
عائلات
in the
الضحايا
past,
من جهة
the
محاولة
families
الاعتقال
of the
الضحايا
victims, the
بشكل
survivors, and the issue
كبير
of
والتواجد
detainees
والجزء
is
الآخر
where some of the issues that are not discussed or the last to be discussed, if
حتى
they ever were
يقدر
discussed in
يكون
the
هذا
international
يؤثر على
meetings.
هذه الضحايا
I want to add here
وأن
that
هناك
even the families of the
واحدة
survivors, of the
سيطرة
victims and the survivors, they attend
الضحايا على ما
as witnesses
جرت
only, as witnesses on
الإصرار
what happened.
بالسنوات
But
الماضية
what
إنه
the change
المرأة
that happened in the
المطالبة
past
بهذا الحق
couple of
الغذائي
years,
لأنهم
the
رفضوا لمدة فقط
insistence
شهور
of the
لأن
families who
يكون في الصدارة
rejected to be
لتقاضي
only
الحل لقضية
witnesses and
البشرية.
wanted to take the lead
هذا
in the issue
نجح
of their
للتوصل
loved
على
ones.
نتيجة
This
سهلة
brought
ببداية الطريق، لكن
or
هي
bore
مستمرة
fruit, although
على
this fruit is
هذه
still in the beginning
العقوبة.
of, or we are still in the beginning of
أستاذ
our road.
مريم،
So thank you, Ahmad. Now I'm moving to Maryam,
بدي أسمع منك أكثر عن
and I want to hear from you
العدالة
more about
عن ميثاق الحقيقة والعدالة
the Charter
ودوركم
for
أنتم
Truth and Justice
كرابطة عائلات قيصر
and your role as the families
والرابطة
of Caesar
ومشرفين
families.
لها.
And you are the
كيف
manager and one of the
حتستفيد
founder of this
يا ريت كمان
association. What is your
تعطينا
role and
خبرة
what you are
رابطة
doing? Please
عشان
introduce the
أستاذ أحمد
association
يشوف
to the
معلومات أكثر
audience.
يعني.
Maybe some people
تفضلي
don't know
أستاذ مريم.
anything about the
شكرا آمنة،
association.
شكرا
Over to you.
اللي تحدثوا.
Thank you, Amna, and thanks for the
بوجه
previous
تحية
speakers. I would like
للسيدات
to
والسادة كما
say to
هو
everyone, ladies and gentlemen, as much as it is very beautiful to be together as Syrians. My friends talked about working together on issuing the Charter for Truth and Justice. The Caesar Families Association is one of the associations part of this work. The Caesar Association includes families who lost their loved ones. We can call them deceased, martyrs, a missing person. No matter what you call him or her, the result is that we lost them. We found their pictures amongst the pictures that were leaked by Caesar. In 2018, we came together and we established the families of Caesar photos because, as my colleague said, that our common grounds is the pain that brings us together. The Caesar Families Association aims at taking care of those families in general, and of course, holding the killers and the perpetrators accountable, and putting pressure to reveal the mass graves in order to receive the dead bodies of our loved ones. So the association contributes to raising awareness of the families if they want to get the truth about what happened or the current condition of their missing person, if they detained in a certain period, which is from March 2011 until uh, August 2013. This is the period where the Caesar photos cover. Our documentation department is helping the families to recognize or identify their martyrs through these photos by sending a photo of the person before detention, and our documentation center compares it with using advanced technology and to try to find if the person is there or not, and we hope that they don't be part of these photos. I will go back to the charter, and as Ahmad and Fadwa mentioned, we started with a first step for transitional justice on the short term, which is demanding to have a mechanism to reveal the fate of the forcibly disappeared persons and the need for of Syrians to know the truth, trying to be adopted by the United Nations, which can get into Syria before the end of the conflict and reveals the fate of detainees in secret detention places and in mass graves, and to hand over the dead bodies or the remnants of our loved ones to do the ceremonies that they deserve and bury them properly. Millions are waiting because each one of the disappeared persons have a family, has a family who's waiting, a father that is waiting, a family, a mother that is hoping and waiting and looking at the door, waiting them to get into the to knock on the door, or children who are waiting for them. And the years are going year after year, and the age is passing while they are in detention places, and they don't know if they are going to see the sun ever again. I received the death license of my of Ayham, just as other families received the certificates of their sons. These licenses are not credible, and those families didn't recognize these licenses because some people who received the death certificate, their sons came back to life because they were not killed. And we in the families of Caesar, we are waiting the truth for all of these years. Actually, I don't know if this hope and waiting is better, or the feeling of disappointment and closing the door of hope is better. I keep asking myself these questions. Now, the hope for all Syrians is to, I hope that and very soon, to see Syrians, one hand, to forget about our differences, no matter how big are they are. But maybe you think that I'm dreaming, but let's pause and think about the price that we have paid. It can't be measured. It's invaluable. Let's stop these losses and let's trust each other and trust our society, and then we can demand the international community, other organizations, and decision makers to support us to achieve our goals and to reach a safe Syria. We, as a women group,
بالانضمام إلينا.
demand you all as Syrians to unify our steps and to think of other steps that will bring us together to achieve our goals, as we have conducted in the Charter for Truth and Justice, and demanding a mechanism to reveal the fate of the disappeared persons. And I would invite you to support this mechanism to find them as long they are still alive before they get killed in prisons. If we go together, if we work together, we can do a lot. So many of you now have the citizenship of the countries you are living in, and you have a role and you have a responsibility to communicate our voices and our cause to those governments and to reinvigorate and bring back the momentum for this humanitarian issue that will not be resolved so far as we are still talking about our differences and our problems. So let's start with the first step to put pressure to learn the truth, and then we continue with the other steps that are mentioned in the charter, and you are going to create further steps. These steps are the ones that will bring us safely to our countries. I know that the solution is not in our hands, and we are waiting the countries that have the decisive countries which will find the appropriate moment where it will feed into their interest. However, in our unity, we can make these decisions in our interest. Don't forget that there are experiences in the world that we can learn from. However, we are going to make our own experience, and we will be a lighthouse that will, or a flashlight that will lead others behind us or generations to come. Thank you very much, Maryam. They are hopes. Inshallah, God willing, they will not stay as hopes. I always say that right now we are working. Maybe there will be no fruit, but if we don't work, absolutely there will be no fruit, and nothing will happen, and no change will take place, especially when the people who are the owner of this issue are working on it. Now I will move to Mr. Khalil. After the colleagues spoke about the charter and the role of the charter, how this charter can translate from a written document to be translated into reality. Can I ask you how the international community dealt with the charter and the issue of the detainees in general? The other four associations represent one side, and you are representing another side. You are representing the families of those who were detained by ISIS, and this is a topic that has different aspects. So if you may introduce the association and then answer the question. Thank you, Ms. Amna, and I would like to thank the speakers before me. You talked about the charter, and even they also spoke about the history of detention and forcibly disappearance in Syria. I am a member of the alliance of people who were kidnapped by ISIS. This alliance was created in 2019 and registered as an association licensed in France. We demand to expose or to disclose the fate of those who were kidnapped by ISIS, and we are present in Germany, Syria, France, Turkey. So wherever there are Syrians who suffered from that, we have members. So we're working in. We are working to achieve two main goals: to disclose the fate of the kidnapped persons and to know where they are, and trying to build a case from the humanitarian and legal and political aspects. We know that after the collapse of ISIS, and there is no land that they control, and there are no more detention centers that they control. This makes us different, as Amna said, different from other associations. whose enemy is the regime. Our enemy is ISIS. And so in our case, we are talking about individuals and those who are managing these individuals and not as states. So that's the main difference between ourselves and other associations. And this is the difficulty in our work and the source of pain as well, especially that in 2017, the regime started to lose control in the country. So it became very difficult to find our people. I think he means the ISIS, not the regime. So we started to look for the massive graves. We have a unique position because the area that was under the control of ISIS, it is divided into zones of control or influence. We have a side that was under the control of Al-Nusra Front, another one under the Turkey-backed National Army, and we have areas under the control of the regime and Russia, and we have other parts of Syria that are under the control of the Syrian Democratic Forces backed by the United States. So this makes us or makes our problem that we have a larger problem, because those countries and those groups on the ground makes them deal with the matter according to the politics, which means what is useful for this side now might not be useful for them after some time. So maybe Russia will be interested in the matter of the detainees if that will make problems to the United States, and the United States will be interested in that topic if that will creates a problem to the regime or the national Syrian army, which means that there is no ethical background for their interest in these issues or the de facto authorities or those who back them. So what my colleagues said before me is that the main supporter of these issues is ourselves, the Syrians. Our associations and our groups, not only the families, the entire society. Our option, or the only option, is to continue working on these issues until they are solved, because we are concerned with these issues and we need to find solution for them, because they have to do with our future and the future of our sons and daughters. And I think there will be no peace or stability in Syria unless these matters are closed and we know the fate or the destiny of the detainees and the forcibly disappeared persons. So this is our responsibility if we don't want these issues to be repeated in the future. So today we have this charter. The charter includes certain basic principles. Some of them are immediate, some of them are strategic, that are related to guarantees in the constitution. The immediate demands are the release of all detainees and revealing the fate of all missing persons. And the mechanism that we are calling for, through which we can have a way to solve this problem, and to reveal the fate of the forcibly disappeared persons and to know where their whereabouts. I think this can bring even the countries with different interests in Syria, because I don't think that there will be any country that will object me knowing the fate of my brother, or that allows Miss Maryam to know where is the dead body of her son to bury him properly. I don't think that there is anyone who objects to these rights, or that goes against the interest of any other country. So, to answer the question that you asked me, Ms. Amna, the charter was very satisfactory for us. And as my colleagues mentioned, the issue of detainees and forcibly disappeared persons got back to the front. The most important point in this matter is that it will not go away anymore, because it is now the families are in the lead. Maybe the priorities of the negotiators will change, or they will go under the pressure, certain pressures, or that there will be some other interests. So they will lose, or they will forget about the issues of the detainees. Now we are independent. We are not part of the opposition or part of any agenda. We are part of the agenda of the Syrian community, if we can say so, to overcome the pains that accumulated in the past 10 years. I'm sure that Syrians, step by step, will understand that this is something that is they are all should be concerned about, not only the detainees or the families of their detainees. So this issue requires their interest and their support. I will go back to the international position. Now we are moving from showing or presenting this charter to international organizations and countries to demand a mechanism in order to change this charter into something tangible. We want to disclose the fate of the forcibly disappeared persons. And as I said, it doesn't go against the interest of any country. Nobody can object to the right of knowing the fate of our detained people. So I hope that all Syrians can understand that their fight now is to have a mechanism with international mandate, maybe through the Security Council, that is binding for the regime to reveal the fate of all the detainees. Because this will help Syria to move towards stability and peace. And this is in the interest, the best interest of all Syrians who believe that Syria should be stable. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Khalil.
يمكن لا بدي انتقل هلا لك سيد فضل.
I will move now to Mr. Fadel. I would like to ask you about the role of the Syrian Network for Human Rights, especially in documentation, especially that it started in this work since the beginning of the Syrian revolution and the beginning of detention. We as association, we don't work on documentation, but we work on advocacy of our work. But the documentation with the details in a professional way, which is very important to maintain the memory of the Syrian history. It is one of the things that the Syrian Network for Human Rights do. So if you can tell us about this role and how can you support the Charter for Truth and Justice and how do you look at this charter? Thank you, Ms. Amina, and I would like to thank all the colleagues since the early days and even before issuing the charter, and even within the movements of the Families for Freedom, I was honored to attend the launch of the movement, and this is a very important uh, a cooperation and a continuous cooperation. We wanted to make this event with those associations so people can hear more about the charter and how important it is to support it and to see what following steps are going to happen and how this charter later can have a fruit for this cooperation in the coming phase. The network was established in June 2011, and the regime was following two techniques: killing and detention. And detention was prior to killing. It started with in the 14th of March, and before March, actually, it started in February when it killed two people. Now, after months of the establishment of the network, we started to collect data, document them, and I have my colleague Sana Al Khatib in the detention department, and most of the team that is working in the network are survivors or prosecuted. So this issue is a huge responsibility and a huge burden, and no one side can bear that responsibility. So this is the responsibility of all of us, not only the humanitarian organizations, because they are either displaced or they are either former detainees or victims themselves. So this is the responsibility of the community itself. It is the responsibility of the victims themselves. This is a memory that is the responsibility of everyone, even the politicians. And as we mentioned, now it is not on the agenda of their works. It should be in the heart of their agenda. It's not only the responsibility of the association of the victims or civil society organizations, it is the responsibility of the families of those victims. Without the support of those families, we can't do anything. The victims themselves, and maybe when they get out of the prisons, if we don't qualify them, if we don't support them to say or to speak about what happened to them, to document the systematic approach that is followed by the regime. And that's how the data are built in documentation based on the cooperation of the victims to say that the data is well documented. And we say that based on such data, we can issue reports and make advocacy campaigns to face the amount of violence the Syrian community faced. Amina is saying that there is a focus on the issue of the detainees. Until now, there are 250,000 Syrian citizens, and this is the minimum number, because sometimes when we get a trainee who comes, we say that this is the minimum number, and we have a lot of other numbers that we didn't register. And why this is, I would allow me to say, why do we focus on the documented ones? Because the international organizations or the countries, they don't, they are not built, or their positions are not built on assessments. Everybody can make assessment. That's why when we say that we need data, that's why we say that this data is very important. First, in order to, and this number, of course, increases with the help of the victims. And those numbers will be used for accountability when there is a compensation for the victims, or there is reparation, and we will have national patriotic organizations that are going to provide compensation for those victims, financially, materially, and unmaterially, or morally. So these are some of the numbers. Some people attack us and all the time, and they either say that the numbers are low, and of course those people don't do anything in documentation, so they just talk about this issue, which is mentioned in all of the methodology. Because when we issue a number, we need to defend that number if we are requested to show the data of such a figure. And we, as a humanitarian organization, for example, they say that you mentioned this number, so where is the data behind this number? So it's not a matter of showing or receiving popularity. We are talking about 250 people, 250,000 people who are under detention. Those are not the ones who were detained and released in the past 10 years, because if we include that, maybe the number will be 10 times or 10 folds this number. So we're talking about two 102,000 detainees. And actually, they're not detained, they are kidnapped. And this is something that we mentioned in our reports, because there is no legal warrant, and they don't allow them to communicate with anyone. They have a civil party that detains them. So such a crime is huge. So now I will move to the second point of my interventions. This is a crime against the humanity that continues since 2011. And we always say that detention and forced disappearance is accompanied with detention, with the torture. As researchers, we are generalizing here, and although we say no generalization should be made, but this is correct generalization. There is no detention without torture in Syria. And there is also a well-established rule that no detention was made based on a judicial warrant. We don't have a lack of information or lack of data. More than that, there are decisions that are made by the highest bodies in the world. And there are, for example, from the COI or from the Security Council, there are report decisions or resolutions, for example. For example, the first resolution that was issued on Syria in 2012, it talked about Kofi Annan's plan, which is based on the 6 points of his plan, is talking first and foremost on the release of the detainees. These are, of course, when we talk about the freedom, these are political demands. As a second decision, 2034, then decision in February 2014, It talked about the forcibly disappeared persons, and it talked about revealing their destiny, and the resolution 2254, which is the decision of the political transition in Syria, which was issued in January 2015. So there are international resolutions. Demistura, for example, created a special committee, and they demanded allowing the COI or investigation bodies to get into Syria, and the regime didn't allow anybody to do that. And regardless of that, the regime didn't take any step, and all of these tracks, the international community didn't manage to reveal a single person. There is negligence that is worrying. I will speak on the third point now, with this, which is the last point. What does all of that mean? Shall we stop issuing reports and not demand freedom and justice? No. As Ahmad said, why do we repeat working? Because those people who are detained and people who were who died under torture, shall we forget about them? What about their rights and the rights of their families and the rights of the community or the society at large? So this is our responsibility. And as Khalil said, not only those who were subject to these suffering, even those who didn't suffer from that. We're talking about 150,000 people. Not only it is the worst case in the world, but in comparison with the population, which is 25 million strong, this is a large percentage compared to other countries. So why do we issue such documents and we demand mechanisms to activate these issues? Why? Because demanding the accountability is our responsibility, who survived this suffering. And the other point is that this crime is still going on. Every month we issue reports, and not a single report was issued, not a single month. For 10 years, we issued a report with 0 detentions. And we are talking about scores of detentions. So can you imagine how many people are there? So now I will speak. I will conclude with the recommendations. So what can we do? So, for example, there are resolutions by the Security Councils, and the Special Envoy created a mechanisms, but nothing happened. What we can do is that we can provide anything, even if the result is very simple, is better than not doing anything. Because if we don't do anything, it means that the case will be forgotten. Once we don't do anything in that regard, it means that the case will be forgotten. This is common sense. So the recommendations, the three or four recommendations. First, we need to speak with all the countries, the friendly countries, about the normalization with the regime. And when we do advocacy on the issue, when we say that there will be normalization with the regime, it means that it is a blank check for the regime to do whatever they want with those detainees. The regime is responsible for 85% of the detentions in Syria. So what does it mean to open a new page or a new chapter with the regime? Number two, not only to criticize the regime, we need to criticize the backers of the regime, Russia and Iran. The regime doesn't do anything without the approval of the Russians. Number three, the issue of supporting
دعم أسر المعتقلين
supporting the families of the detainees and the forcibly disappeared persons, especially the displaced ones. It's not enough to say that the United Nations is providing support, or the international community. What about the Syrians? Because there are a large part of the families of the detainees are the ones who are displaced. They are the most vulnerable groups of the people. And finally, we in the SNHR, we always ask countries to advocate for this issue with the friendly countries, to pay or to support the charter, to call for the mechanism, and to call for the accountability and follow up on this topic, and to provide support for the families of the forcibly disappeared persons. And providing support, so this is the final thing from me, is supporting the issue of women, because most of the detainees are men. So the breadwinner of the house become women. So here, women are going into the market or the work. And here we have another issue, which is blackmailing and exploitation of women. And as Maryam said, that the issue of the detainees should be a part of from the Astana issue, from the Astana track, and we need to push for that to continue that topic on the agenda of the international community. Thank you very much, Fadel, and thank you for the added value, for the enrichment of the this discussion through your words. Now I will move to the questions. We have a question which says, how can we advocate for the victims of detention to put a pressure on the regime, and how can we join you in the charter?
تتفضلي فدوى الجواب.
Fadwa, would you like to answer this question?
أول شيء بيسعدنا إنه حدا هيك يقول إنه نحن كيف فينا نضمن.
First, it is we're very glad to hear this question from someone who would say that how can we join the charter? Anybody working on the issue of the detainees, you can work on one of the principles of the charter. This will be an advocacy for the charter. How can you join? There are certain mechanisms, whether you are a member, individual, or an organization. We have mechanism, but I'm not aware of. But anybody who supports any of the principles of the charter, so this is advocacy for the women. Or for the charter, sorry, but maybe later we can talk about mechanisms for others to join the charter.
هون ممكن أضيف على ما ذكرتي فدوى
Here I can add,
أنه
Fadwa, because
وحدة
I
العدالة
am
الدولية
one
وبالتالي
of
تهدف للروابط
the
الموجودة
families for
فيها
freedoms and one of the
تعمل
associations
بكل الروابط
in the
للرجال
charter. I believe all
ووجود
associations
السوريين
can
بصفوفها
have
وكل واحد يحقق
Syria with the Syrians on their ranks, because we are all working on
مرتبط بالحرية
one issue,
العصبية
but
يعني
this
البحث
categorization is
عن
related to the
حرية
type of the case that we
التعامل
are
مع
working on.
الناس
We, for
المستضعفين
example, the Families
والنظام
for
السوري
Freedom will work with
هو
all
أيضا إطلاق
families
سراح
of detainees, whether detained by
بأي
the
صورة
regime or by
كانت
other parties to the
على
conflict.
عائلات
The
الذين خرجت صور أحبتهم
the Caesar family, for example, are working with the families whose
لديه فرد
pictures were
عائلي
found
يكون عضو
among the Caesar files. So any member or any family
ليصل
who is member or whose loved one
أيضا
is detained
الأطراف
or whose picture
اللي
was found
عضوات
amongst the pictures of
مسار
Caesar can be part
نفس الشيء
or
بخص
can join the
منطقة
families of
سيدنايا
Caesar.
منطقة معتقل
The same, for
سيدنايا
example, for the family
تضم
association of Sednaya
الأقلية
prisoners. It
الذين
includes the
كانوا
former
في
prisoners
سيدنايا
who were
وأغلب
in
الشباب
Sednaya prison, and
لجأوا
I
للتواصل
think
مع
that
هذه
you can
البنات
communicate with their,
في سجن
and even
صيدنايا
those who are detained
ويمكن
right
أن
now, you
يتواصل
can communicate
نحن مثلا
with them.
ببرنامج
We in
تعافي
the
عملنا
Ta'afi
عمل
program,
يكون على
the work
معالجي
is
والناجيات
with the
والمعتقلين الذين خرجوا من العقوبات
survivors, men and
ومنتهين
women who were
وبالتالي
in a prison and they
أخطأوا
survived
وليس
from prison. So
صاروا
any
خارج السجن يعودوا
former
جزء من العقوبة
detainee can be part
نحن
of
كعائلات
this team. We
يمكن
in the
دور
Families for Freedom, we
الانضمام
have
لنوع من
a kind of
المجال وهو أصدقاء العضو أو
joining
أصدقاء
with which
الفرد
is the friends of
ليكون
the
عندنا مسار
association
لدعوة
to have
والاستفادة من خبرات
a
والرغبة
to make use of the expertise and the willingness of some Syrians who don't have anybody of their family members in detention, but they have a friends and they are interested in providing support. So even we in the Families for Freedoms, we are open for Syrians and non-Syrians as well to join us. So it is an umbrella that brings everyone who is willing to support this issue. Thank you, Fadwa. Next question. In light of considering the forced disappearance and crime in the international law, that the statute of limitation doesn't apply. So what mechanisms can be made for holding the perpetrators accountable? Who would like to answer this question here?
أنا ممكن أجاوب إجابة جزئية.
تفضل
I will answer a personal answer.
يعني الحقيقة يعني نحن على الأقل يعني نكون لدينا برنامج توثيق
At least in our association, we have a program of documentation for the forcibly disappeared persons that follows the international standards. We have a detailed application, one for the revealing the fate of the person, and the other part is about the perpetrator. So this helps in building the case. We follow standards that are requested by the international standards.
محاكمة المسؤولين عن الانتهاكات مستقبلا.
تمام، شكرا خليل. تفضل.
Thank you, Khalil. Fadel, would you please, do you have any addition?
طيب أنا بس بدي أقول إنه بموضوع المحاسبة هي
In terms of accountability, sometimes when we talk about accountability, it is limited to judicial accountability, and this is wrong because accountability is larger than that. And now the legal or the judicial accountability, the only option that is available now is the universal jurisdiction, and they are building files through the COI, and we don't want to look down at the IIM and what it is doing, because it is working with the COI, and we have a memorandum of understanding with the COI to share data in the cases that they are building. Sorry, with the IIM, not with the COI. But we here we can see that there is or people who speak about the universal jurisdiction, that it will stop torture and everything. No, it's not going to do that. And the pressure that is made is not very much. But when we talk about accountability, it's not only about the criminal responsibility. Exposing, naming, and shaming those people is only one part of the accountability. Documentation and restoring the rights of the victims is one part of the accountability. So accountability is larger than the judicial accountability, because sometimes the cases might take years, 6 or 7 years, until it is built and the cases are open. And the punishment is one aspect of, or one form of the accountability. And the transition from this regime to a democratic regime, by doing this, part of the accountability will be achieved. Thank you. Ahmad, do you have anything to add? 2 minutes only. We, as a group of 5 associations, when we put in the vision of this association, we mentioned short-term and long-term justice We mentioned that it is an ongoing issue, but unfortunately, right now in the Syrian context, accountability, there is no accountability. There is no process of genuine accountability. Accountability will take place when the perpetrators are not in power anymore. Right now, the criminals of all parties are still in power. Once they are out, they can be held accountable. They can be sent to prisons. Uh, they can face any kind of accountability, criminal or other types of accountability. So this work requires a lot of work and preparation. In the group, we have so many of the lobbying that we do is to put accountability on the top of the agenda in preparation for the appropriate moment that where we can hold the perpetrators accountable. So that's why we are supporting any efforts in that field, whether they are preparation or symbolic steps that are taking place outside of Syria. Here, I would like to add that some of the things that distinguish the Syrian context is that the documentation is taking place at the same time of detention. So detention is taking place and detention is taking place and documentation is taking place at the same time. And the same applies to the files of accountability for the war criminals in Syria. Usually, in other contexts, they used to start after the end of the conflict. The documentation starts and accountability takes place. But in Syria, they are going together in parallel. I have a question now for you, Maryam. You were calling on Syrians not only as a head of your association, but as a mother. And you said to Syrians that you can do a lot of things, especially those in Europe and those who have other nationalities. What can they do? Especially, there is a question that we are always asked, and I asked also, and I will leave you to answer the question. They ask us, what do you get when you hold the picture and stand in the street showing the picture? I will answer the first question. What can they do? They can do a lot. So we also said that we, as an example, we are 5 associations. We are 5 people. We represented 5 associations. Of course, we have other members, but the most effort was on upon our shoulders, the 5. We met online because COVID-19 was holding us back from movement, and we were meeting once or twice every week, and we were able to come up with this charter. As we said, the charter is a roadmap. So every group in their respective country, we were talking about the Netherlands or Belgium or Sweden, we have a large number of Syrians. They can do that. They can meet together and they can come up with new ideas that they can offer for Syria. Once again, I would like to say, we can't sit down and wait the international community to do work for ourselves. We need to do our homework and we need to tell the international community you have to do this. Now, those who have nationality now, they can vote and they can select the party whose interests or their goals might be in line with our goals. So those who have nationalities and new nationalities, they should look for the parties that support the Syrian matters and vote for them and heavily. In Germany, for example, I believe there are 7 in the parliament from Syrian origin in the German parliament. So Syrians who want to work, they can do work and they can create groups. So as you said, as a mother, when I ask the Syrians to meet, I know that everybody maybe shook their hands and said, look what she's saying, but why not? Why can't we forget everything? And we see that we have a major goal, which is Syria, and to put our hands together. If we continue talking about each other, nothing will happen, and actually things will be worse. But when we be proactive and positive, work together, forget our differences, the Syrian issue will improve, not only the cause of the detainees. So this is a wish from a mother to and a mother not only of my sons, a mother for a lot of Syrians, because I have a feeling that a lot of the young Syrians are my own sons, and they have a lot to offer to Syria. So let's work together and do anything that can uh, makes us move forward rather than moving backward. What was your other question, Amina? The question that I usually get: what do we get to when we raise the photos of our sons? Yes, as you said, we want to remind everyone that we have detainees. No brother or sister or a wife or a mother can forget that she has someone who is missing and knows nothing about them. My son's photo was among the Caesar photos. That's right. But because I didn't see his dead body, I have a hope, which is a one in a million, that he might be alive. Although the picture was clear, but they didn't even give me his ID. So these are the ideas that we always get, that we want to remind the people all the time that we want those people. And even when I uh, say I want a grave for my son, I mean that genuinely. I met, for example, with the one who was digging graves in Coplands, and he told me how they dig the graves. And I have a hope to see my son, but I want him, and I want to bury him properly in a grave. I'm not talking about my own wish or my own dream. This is the same dream of so many mothers who lost two or three or four sons. And we don't forget the lady who is with us in the association. Her mother lost five sons in a short period of time. So that's what we're saying, that when we are holding the pictures of our sons, we are telling the people that we want to remind people that there are detainees, we have martyrs, and we want to tell people that we did not cease to demand our rights and the rights of our victims, and we are going to demand their rights as long as possible. Thank you very much for your inspiring words. I will add something to what you said about the Syrians, especially the families of the detainees who are living in Europe. Maybe we have more responsibility. That's what I feel myself, not towards my brothers who are detained alone, but towards the Syrians and the other detainees. We have now the luxury, maybe, or the external luxury, not internally, to communicate with parties that will support our cause. Now, everyone who is living in Europe, you can communicate with the parliament member of your district to ask them about what did your country do about, for example, if you are in Germany or in the UK or any place, we can, in a face to face meeting or in an email or a message or a letter, you can ask him, for example, what did Germany do in terms of the human rights issue or human rights violations in Syria? This is something that is available in Syria. This question might be addressed to the foreign ministry. Maybe this is a simple thing, and you
الذاكرة، نوع من أنواع النضال. نحن أصلا خياراتنا
we ask this question, but this is a kind of a struggle. For example, we are unable to go and make strikes or sit-ins at the doors of the detention places and demand them to release them, but we can do whatever we can. If there is any addition from you, and if there is none, please allow me to conclude this webinar and allow me to thank you for your time and your contributions talking about this group work and the charter. And I will reiterate that our work on the issue of detention is a struggle to preserve the memory and to keep that issue at the top of the agenda. When we are doing that, we are not only commemorating the struggle of our loved ones, but we are also documenting the criminality of the regime and other factions that are operating in Syria. And this is something very important. Maybe we all see that the regime started to work because there are several videos that are removed from YouTube, and these videos were documentation of the regime, and this removal of these videos was on purpose. And this is part of the short-term justice that some of my colleagues mentioned that we are working on. That's why we will continue. We have deep hopes and we will not be frustrated, and we have a strong will to continue working together as Syrians, and hopefully we can meet you face to face soon. Thank you very much.